Thank you so much. Everyone has taken the time to join us at this very important meeting that we're having today. Nobody needs to be told how much the PSPS events have affected our community, and we sent that letter last year that was signed by both the board and both cities. Today is about focusing on where we're going from here. We have some great updates to present to both the people who are taking the time to be with us today, and everyone who's taking the time now to watch us on streaming video or can watch us in the future. Great messages from the CPUC, PG&E, and our state representatives. We're going to start with a call to order and introductions, but just a quick rundown of our agenda today so you know where different things will fit into our meeting. We're going to do a quick approval of our minutes from our last meeting. Then we're going to start with CPUC representative, move on to Senator McGuire's office, then Assembly Member Aguiar-Curry's office. We'll get an update from PG&E, and then we'll start a discussion regarding the issues and impacts and an action plan regarding PSPS. After that, we'll have specific public input. If your concerns, questions, or points of view have not been covered or heard yet at that point, we'll focus on a few next steps, and then we'll adjourn. So if we could just start with introductions. We'll start with Bruno.
Bruno Sabache, District 2 Supervisor.
Moke Simon, District 1 Supervisor and also Chairman of the Board of Lake County Board of Supervisors.
I am Mireya Turner. I am with the City of Lakeport.
Russ Kramer, City of Clear Lake, Mayor.
Stacy Matina, City of Lakeport, City Council.
Let's go down this table, starting with Margaret.
Margaret Silveris, City Manager, Lakeport.
Carol Hutchinson, County Administrative Officer.
Alan Flores, City Manager, City of Clear Lake.
Great. Martha, thank you.
Good morning. Martha Guzman, or good afternoon. Martha Guzman, Commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission.
Joyce Steingass, CPUC Energy Division. I'm an engineer.
Roshan Mutialu, CPUC, Safety and Enforcement Division, Electric Safety and Reliability.
Aaron Johnson, I'm a Vice President in PG&E's Electric Operations Organization.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll all stand with me. Willie, would you lead us, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before the committee, then, are the draft minutes of the December 19th, 2019 meeting.
To move that we
Go ahead. Thanks,
make a
Russ.
motion that we approve the minutes of December 9th, 2019 meeting.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Up next is our update from CPUC Commissioner Martha Guzman-Aceves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here today. I want to thank specifically Chair Supervisor Simon for coming out to the CPUC, coming out to San Francisco, going to Sacramento, and really letting us know what was happening in Lake County and what had happened, unfortunately, in many different communities and many different households. So I want to thank you for your leadership and thank all of the working group here for what they shared earlier today on specifics from the hardships from folks with medical disabilities to folks just living off of a well, everything that we've heard, unfortunately, up and down the state of California, which I'm here to just share with you some of what we're doing because we also find it unacceptable. It is not a new normal as far as we're concerned. It is a time of transition, of getting our utilities up to speed to the new reality that we're here faced with in California. And I want to just share a few of the areas that we want to hear your input on to get these practices and improvements in place. And and talk about a few next steps in the action plan, but more importantly, the much-needed collaboration and communication that is missing from PG&E. So with that, I just want to talk about a couple of our rulemakings, and very timely need to hear from all of you directly and through your leadership here. One of the areas that we're working on is the rules for the shutoffs. And clearly, the lack of communication is first and foremost to the public and specifically to the local government and the first responders. We have put out a set of new requirements that we are proposing and are out for comment, essentially. Things like having a working group with your local government, having a portal for the local government to participate, having 24-hour community resource centers, having language access for those who do not speak English, and a lot of other details. So we'll be sharing that and hopefully hearing back, particularly ask if we could do it as a working group, even more powerful, to know the exact things that you'd like. Anything from specifics on communication methods to actual community resource centers, anything like that that we need to be more specific on. Second to that, in the improvement of the actual protocols for the shutoffs and the returning of the light, is the hardening and the vegetation management that has been lacking for decades. And that is a whole nother area. We have had wildfire mitigation plans for a long time that we've required of the utilities. But with the advent of these catastrophic fires, the legislature has actually created an entire new branch. And this wildfire branch is being done in coordination with the Resources Agency and particularly CAL FIRE. So there's a whole new set of requirements on the utilities for hardening their infrastructure and for vegetation management, and there's many more specifics in between that. And finally, the other, and these are not the only three, but the kind of top three, is the microgridding, as people are talking about, of the infrastructure. And really we'll wait to hear the latest update from PG&E on that today. But that is the opportunity to put generation next to the substations so that as many of the communities stay lit as possible. And that is work we're going to be doing, or is already underway, but work that we really want to see that might take different phases, might take temporary generation like diesel backup this year with more permanent generation in the future. And finally, as a subset of that, are particular locations that are critical community places like schools that we want to see backup generation at, regardless of if the community itself is totally lit. And so there's different efforts along those lines, and want to talk about some follow-up actions that we can take to make sure we get the most critical facilities, particularly schools that are not already required to have backup, like hospitals. So with that, really want to reinforce that we are also not seeing this again as something that is acceptable for the long term or the short term, and that we're here to listen to specifics and try to make an action plan for this fall in particular, but also moving forward for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have an update from Senator McGuire's office. Hey, Taylor.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Morrison. I'm a district representative for State Senator Mike McGuire. Senator McGuire regrets not being here this afternoon. He is currently on his way to Del Norte County for the opening of a nursing program that he spearheaded. So at the last meeting, Senator McGuire mentioned he believes PG&E has proven time and time again that it lacks the basic fundamentals to successfully execute the large and complex planned outages that we experienced last year. It is outrageous, and their customers deserve better. He believes that all options need to be on the table at this time, including breaking up the utility or bringing in another entity to take it over. As you know from our meeting in 2019, the state moved on critical reforms last year, including linking PG&E executive compensation to safety improvements and establishing a new safety committee in the Department of Natural Resources, whose whole mission is to hold this utility and other state utilities accountable. The state is forcing PG&E and other utilities to spend $5 billion to expedite safety improvements, grid modernization, and enhance vegetation management. And they are making critical changes at the Public Utilities Commission, appointing a new chairwoman and commissioner. The State Senate also created 2 working groups to focus on these challenges, and Senator McGuire has been appointed co-chair. The working groups have been meeting since fall 2019. The first working group, Energy and Insurance Stability Group, which McGuire co-chairs, is focused on energy market and insurance stability. The second group, Wildfire Response and Resiliency, is focused on state and community level wildfire response and resiliency and forest health strategies, which McGuire has been appointed co-chair as well. So from these working groups, the State Senate has launched an action plan, which will be one of the boldest in America. The plan is focused on keeping Californians safe, holding utilities accountable, and advancing innovative solutions to some of our toughest challenges. Our goal is to protect residents from the growing climate crisis and the threat of wildfire, and to help stabilize our energy and residential insurance markets. Over the next 90 days, the Senate will hold a series of hearings to bolster the work that began late last year and in early 2020. In addition, a series of bills will be introduced as a part of the action plan. So the senators will introduce legislation to accomplish the following goals as part of the action plan. 1, fast-track electric grid hardening, modernization, and reliability and vegetation management. 2, implement public safety power shutoff strategies to avoid another catastrophic year. 3, develop home and community hardening strategies to keep Californians safe. 4, address homeowner insurance non-renewals and stabilize California's home insurance market. 5, reduce fire risk around neighborhoods to protect people and property. 6, improve community land use planning and emergency preparedness. 7, train and deploy a resiliency workforce. And so we're already seeing some bills like this, like Senator McGuire's SB 431, that will force telecom companies to have backup power for cell sites. So some new amendments were recently introduced that will add cable service providers to the power backup mandate and lengthen the amount of time the backup power system operates to no less than 72 hours. McGuire is also advancing important legislation that will take PG&E's 10-year time frame for making desperately needed improvements on like grid modernization, hardening, and vegetation management on 7,000 miles of their lines in the most critical fire territory to 3 years. So we're firm believers that it's about damn time that this utility is held accountable. Senator McGuire also introduced SB 944, which is the Fire Safe Home Tax Credit. This is a common sense bill that will help expedite desperately needed fire safe retrofits, which can be incredibly costly on thousands of homes in the most threatened regions of the state. And so this fire safe tax credit program would allow Californians to write off up to $10,000 one time on home hardening project, and is part of a larger data-driven plan to strategically invest in the most threatened communities to help neighbors retrofit their homes and usher in a more stabilized insurance market. And so Senator McGuire, he agrees that the rollout of these power shutoff events are completely unacceptable, and Californians and Lake County residents deserve much better from this utility. And you will be seeing more bills coming out of the Senate Action Plan in the next few months. And I just want to thank you again for inviting our office to this meeting and allowing me to just give you an update from Senator McGuire. So thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. We now have Laura Beltran, a representative from Assembly Member Cecilia Aguiar-Curry's office.
Good afternoon. As stated, my name is Laura Beltran. I'm a field representative for Assembly Member Cecilia Aguiar-Curry. I'm just here to give a quick update of how Assemblywoman is involved with PG&E. Assembly Member Aguiar-Curry is one of our 4 members appointed by the Speaker Randon to represent the Assembly in a bi-weekly briefing on PG&E bankruptcy. This work group is to work directly with Governor's office. Her primary focus is to assure that the cost should be responsibility of the corporation and its shareholders. This cost should not be passed on to the ratepayers. While she supports the leverage of administration and the courts have over PG&E with public utility options, she's very concerned with the governing of the utility assets. Energy service for small cities and rural constituents must be protected, allowing big cities in the PG&E service area to skim high-value assets from PG&E corporations without assuming a fair share of liability will be extremely unfair and result in a rate increase in our rural customers. She's also raised the issue of corporate governance in legislative work groups so that we assure the bankruptcy plan that the utility adopts a culture of customer safety and service rather than protecting the corporate interest. Nowhere was this more evident than the PSPS event in the last fall, where large number of customers were shut off without our being sure it was absolutely necessary for public safety rather than overprotecting PG&E's corporate liability. With that, also, our office was requested to give an update on AB 836, but this is a bill by Assembly Wicks. So for those who are not familiar with this bill, AB 836, it was created in response to increased number of wildfires that have been impacting our state, especially in Northern California. And specifically, this bill establishes a state program in which cities can apply for funding to turn public spaces into clean air centers, which people can access during emergency air quality events. As we know, a lot of our buildings here in Northern California lack AC or have poor ventilation systems that do not filter out particulate matter. This toxic air created by the North Bay fires, 2017 and 2018, have traveled length of the state and impact the air quality of residents living hundreds of miles away. The wildfire smoke contains elevated levels of particulate matters, as we know, from wood structures, and it could affect various people's health, especially the elderly and children. So what this bill does is directs the Air Resource Board to establish a guideline for cities to identify public spaces that can be converted into clean air centers for the public to access during wildfires. It also creates a funding program which cities can apply for grants to retrofit this current ventilation system in these buildings in order to create a network of clean air spaces. The priority of this fund is given most vulnerable populations such as schools, low-income communities, and cities with most heavily burdened by pollution. The Assembly member voted for this bill in support, and the way it affects our district is, as we know, the North Bay fires affected all counties, Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, Santa Rosa, and Lake. Camp Fire blanketed our district with pollution, and this is just giving acceleration to climate change, and we can expect more of severe wildfires events in the future. The Bay Area Quality Management District, which was the sponsor of this bill, currently is developing guidelines to identify public spaces that can be converted into clean air centers, applying funding to retrofit these spaces with ventilation systems, and working in improved forecasting technologies that early warning systems for wildfires, and equipping emergency response organizations like the Red Cross with portable ventilation systems that can be set up to remote locations. All these efforts are really important to our district, especially impacted by the wildfires once again. This is a quick update that we have from the Assembly member, and again, we thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and address you and give you an update of what we're working on. And as you know, we're working with the Senator McGuire and as well as Senator Bill Dodd with all the bills regarding to the fire. So we're all united working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next update is from PG&E Vice President Aaron Johnson.
And we do have the PowerPoint for you, Aaron, if you would like Carolyn to put it up for you. And
So first of all, thank you very much for having me, and I am very appreciative to see both county and local government working together in the fashion that you all are working together today and coming together to have this important discussion. So thank you for including us.
We can do this. Here we go. There we go. Okay.
Perfect, thank you. Is it okay if I just ask you to advance the slides when the time comes? Okay, thank you. So, just as way as introduction, again, my name is Aaron Johnson. I'm a vice president in our electric operations organization. 2 years ago, I came out of my job working on our low-income and energy efficiency programs to help with wildfire mitigation at PG&E in response to the North Bay fires. As you can see on this first slide, if we could go to the first slide, that program has entailed really three key areas of focus for us. Improving real-time monitoring intelligence, adding weather stations, a wildfire safety center, adding cameras into the field to be able to see better what's going on. A series of new safety practices in terms of how we actually operate the grid, as well as enhanced vegetation management beyond what we have historically done. You'll see at the bottom of that middle column is the Public Safety Power Shutoff Program. And I'll be focusing most of my remarks on that program, obviously, since we're here to talk about that. And then in the final column, the thing that will take longer, which is really hardening the system, given the environment in which that system operates and the level of fire activity that we've certainly seen increase over the last several years. The way that system has been designed historically is not sufficient for what needs to meet the needs of the communities that we have the privilege to serve. So I don't think I need to, if we could go to the next slide. I don't think I need to tell the residents of Lake County that this is a heavily fire-prone area. You'll see a map that the California PUC put together in conjunction with the utilities and CAL FIRE over the last several years. The red and yellow areas, which is almost all of the county other than the more developed areas around the lake, are all in the elevated and extreme fire risk area. And these are the areas that we are targeting as part of the Public Safety Power Shutoff program. Next slide, if I could. This is a brief encapsulation of the impacts on this community in terms of the number of customers that were impacted over the series of events this fall. Obviously, you can also see the number of attendees, and that, to me, is representative of the need of support in the community, at the community resource centers, some of the levels of wind that we saw, and then most challenging for me, and absolutely runs counter to what we try and do as a utility, these really, really long outages that some customers experienced. This is showing the customer who had the longest outage, which is not always indicative of folks that were restored earlier, but is, in some instances, 5 days or more that customers were out of power. As the commissioner indicated, we too believe this is not an acceptable way to move forward. As I think about and as we reflect as a leadership team at PG&E about this program, and as one of the key architects of this program, I bear a significant amount of this responsibility, was that our focus was very much on how do we safely do something that we are not built to do, which is turn off the power, and how to do that safely. And that was the lion's share of our focus, and where we really dropped the ball and sort of missed the mark from my perspective and my colleagues' perspective is on the impacts that would have on the communities that we serve. And while we did do some things there, it was certainly not enough to meet the needs and the hardship that was evident as these events unfolded this fall. We do believe this is a necessary tool in these current conditions in order to safely operate the grid, but these events need to be less frequent, they need to be shorter, and smaller in scope as we move forward. Next slide. I did also want to share, just given this is similar information for the tribal communities and what they experienced as part of these events this fall. So that's a similar outage information for them. So if we could go to the next slide. Just a couple more, if you'll bear with me. So what are we doing now? Well, we're doing a lot of listening. It's been very important for me to send all of the executive leadership team of PG&E out to all of the counties that we serve to hear from customers, to hear from local government officials about what the experience was locally on these events. It's one thing to work in our emergency operations center, and all of our leadership was there through many of these events. I worked every event. The fall is a bit of a blur, to be honest with you. I will say that, but I heard in my capacity trying to provide information to the counties, which we did a frankly pretty poor job of initially. I should say the counties and tribes initially, and I think we got a little bit better over time, but we have a long ways to go. I heard a lot of that feedback firsthand. Not all of my leadership team did, and so they are participating in a series of discussions. We have not yet had that meeting in Lake County, but I believe we are having it on Monday, and our CEO will be here for that meeting. So we've heard a lot of feedback. We're gathering all that feedback from county and tribal government, a lot of local government, city government participating in those meetings, and formulating a plan for how to be better this year. That plan is, I like to say, about 3/4 baked. We know a lot of what that feedback is. There's more to be gathered. We need to synthesize everything we've heard in these listening sessions over the last couple of months. The California PUC has certainly heard their share of feedback and has some very direct suggestions for us about things that we can do based on that feedback. So we're not waiting to take action. We have many initiatives underway, and there will be more as we go through, obviously, the off-season, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more rain, and that off-season will be a little longer than it's looking like right now. Again, the first is really improving our weather data analysis, and what this will help us do. There's a lot of data on this slide, and you know how many grid points we divide the service territory up into is probably not that interesting to you, but from an outcome basis, what this will allow us to do is to target weather in more smaller geographical areas, so that we will be able to potentially have a smaller scope. Again, there's a challenge there from an engineering perspective around the way the grid is configured. It doesn't always match up nicely with where the weather is, and so there can be collateral impacts from impact on infrastructure in one place that ends up ultimately serving another part of a county. And it's not intuitive because it's not windy where that collateral impact is. So again, hopefully, or not hopefully, the strategy here is that the weather improvements will allow us to target that a little more neatly, more precisely, I should say. When I go to the bottom here, I'll skip ahead because I spoke about this, which is really figuring out more ways to add what are called sectionalizing devices. It basically lets us narrow where the grid, the parts of the grid that actually need to get turned off. We are adding approximately 600 devices to that. It will reduce the overall footprint of, we've looked at some of the past events. Depending on which event you look at, that should reduce the overall scale by about 10% if you are doing that. Again, depends on the event, depends on where it is and what the weather is. We're also looking at speeding up restoration. So I think the most impactful event was the wind event, the event that ran almost 5 days in many instances of 2 big wind events that came together at the end of October. We were not able to restore power in between those events to all customers. Some were, but not all, and that turned that into a very long event. We've heard from a lot of emergency managers that once you get past about 2 days, a lot of the foundational elements and the risk to people goes up very considerably. And so we are setting a goal to restore power within 12 hours of daylight this year. Again, that time of year, there's 10 to 11 hours of daylight in the late fall, which is really, I should say the fall, which is really when these events are concentrated. And so in order to do that, the primary tool that we're doing is doubling the amount of helicopters from 35 to over 65 that we will have under contract to help us speed up that restoration process. I think if we could go to the next slide, some of the feedback we've heard along the way, and I heard elements of it from both of the senator and the assembly member on their experiences and what they had experienced and heard from their constituents, is around improving information sharing, getting those maps that we had published online more precise, and then obviously the website needs to be functioning in order to access those tools. That sort of goes without saying and is perhaps among the most embarrassing elements of our performance this last fall. Stakeholder coordination, and that comes into the role that I directly played, which is really finding better ways to help our counties and local government and our tribes understand exactly what's happening. We evolved that model significantly over the fall to rather than come to us, we come to the county with its briefing process and brief them locally and deal with local issues, rather than trying to brief 30-plus counties and dozens of tribes all at the same time. So we evolved in the November event to that approach and have gotten a lot of positive feedback about that, and making sure that every governmental entity has a very designated single point of contact who's available or has a substitute 24/7 so that questions can get answered on a real-time basis. We need to expand the community resource centers, and we need to get out of tents. That was an ad hoc system that was put together this last year. So we are working locally with counties and tribes to make sure that we have hard side facilities that will have both air conditioning and heat. We know that for some of those late events, we had not planned appropriately for the cold that was experienced. And so we want to establish those facilities well in advance of fire season so that that's all locked up and we're not scrambling to find those locations during an event, and that we have vetted those with local government and emergency management so that there's a strong sort of co-creation of where are the right places to put these facilities. And then obviously restoration time. I spoke to the additional resources. I think the other piece that we're looking to add there is more transparency around when the restoration will occur. I think of it this way. I think preferably you can estimate before you go into an event how long you think the weather is and how long you think the restoration. We were pretty hesitant, to be candid, this fall, I think, putting those kind of numbers out there because we didn't have enough experience with the program. From the learnings we have here, I think it should be incumbent on us that when we turn off the power, you have at least a working estimate of when we think it will be restored, and more transparency about that. I'll close just on the community resource centers. Our local public affairs folks have been reaching out to the emergency manager, to Dale here in Lake County. We did not realize he was out on medical leave, so we have a little catching up to do. We are beginning to get suggestions for where community resource centers are. We'll be working with you to identify where those facilities should be located throughout the county. We want to make sure that we do ADA checks for all of these centers. We want to agree on what the resources are that are going to be there so that that's known in advance and we're not scrambling again in the event to create those and come up with what the right solutions are. We've heard a lot of feedback that the hours need to be longer. We used employee volunteers to staff that this year. We'll be hiring folks to work there this time. We may be supplementing with our own staff for information purposes. We're still working through that model. But I think that will eliminate some of the employee safety issues and concerns that we had last year about employees being at facilities, especially kind of late at night and at those times. So we're still working through exactly what those hours look like, but we've heard the feedback loud and clear that there needs to be more there. The last slide is just a coverage of some of the things that we look for as we're working through those sites. So in a number of counties we're already working through, we have a team of about 20 people that are going out and doing ADA inspections. And again, our expectation is that all of these facilities are already all set up with generation and everything they need to well in advance of fire season, well before June 1st is our goal. And we are happy to contribute to minor ADA updates that are needed for certain facilities, and also to install transfer switches on buildings so they can accommodate generation, with the expectation that we would provide that generation during the events and potentially throughout fire season, depending on what is the best way to make sure that there's generation for all of these facilities. So with that, I'll conclude and happy to take questions and be part of the discussion as things move forward.
Thank you,
Again,
Mr.
thank you.
Johnson. So before we move on to our next item in our agenda, we have two quick announcements. First of all, if you're watching your watch because you're parked in 2-hour parking west of Main Street, which for us directionally challenged people, it means on this side of Main Street, that 2-hour parking is not being enforced. So feel free to just settle in. We're good. Right? Dream on.
Glad to hear that, too.
Second, the next announcement, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our city and county staff for the efforts that they made to actually have this meeting come together. Alan Flora from the city of Clear Lake and Margaret Silvera from the city of Lakeport, thank you for your efforts on behalf of the cities. And especially thank you to Carolyn Purdy and Carol Hutchinson, who actually made this meeting possible and took all of the questions that the ad hoc committee had compiled that we wanted to direct to our visitors today and organized it into a logical and coherent list of questions to send ahead of time so that our representatives who are here today would be pre-informed and able to answer those questions. If there are any outstanding questions that the committee had that had not been covered yet, that is the purpose of our next line item on our agenda, the discussion of issues, impacts, and action plan regarding PSPS. From our ad hoc committee, do we have anything further?
I do have I have a clarification.
Okay, Bruno and then Russ.
I have a clarification question. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here and helping get some answers and listening to us on what it is that we're looking to get out of this. You talked about sectionalizing on the grid, which sounds great, but then you said a 10% reduction. When we're looking at 10%, we typically, a lot of times, our entire county went down and it would say that we had 37,000 customers or something. So are you sincerely saying that just 3,700 out of the 37,000 would potentially not be de-energized and that the rest would? Since you said 10%, I was just looking for a clarification on what that actually meant.
Right. So what we're doing there, if you reflect back on perhaps, say, the largest event that we had that affected approximately, and I'll go system-wide for us, around 900,000 customers. There are, in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas of the high fire threat district map, that map I showed earlier with the elevated and extreme fire area, which is a little over 50% of the territory we serve, there are actually only about 550,000 customers in that area, so about 10% of the people we serve. A lot of our territory wasn't affected, but you can see that there were many customers who do not live in that fire threat area that were affected by those events. And so what sectionalizing will help us do is peel back. When we looked at that map, when you start looking at the developed areas around the lake, especially on the South Shore, there are areas there that were affected that are not at fire risk, and so that's what we can isolate. As you see from that map, the vast majority of the county is Tier 2 or Tier 3. So all the sectionalizing allows us to do is isolate the areas that we do not want to affect. That's different than the weather, which if we can get the weather more precise where it is, if it's only in a portion of the county, then we can try and shut off only in that county. But if we had a very large event again that was potentially affecting the entire county, that sectionalizing only affects the areas that are in the Tier 1 area, which, as you can see from that map, is a pretty small portion of the county.
Right.
Getting a little more specific on 4 areas, hearing some talk of 3 substations that will be energized. Four that will be energized around the lake. How are you going to accomplish that? I'm hearing generators, I'm hearing solar, I'm hearing all kinds of things. Can you elaborate?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So we have a request for offers that we received offers for about 3 weeks ago, and we're still pouring over. We went through a process to look at where were there parts of PG&E service territory in the fall where the fire risk and the wind risk from our assets starting a fire wasn't present, but that community was affected because one of our transmission lines somewhere many miles away was implicated, and that was your main source of power. And if we could find a way to get power to that area, i.e. a generator at a substation, we could have kept that community in lights. And so we went through and looked at, there were 86 such instances of that across our service territory. We went and looked at all of them. We screened out the ones where it only happened once. That might have been an anomaly. Any place it happened twice or more. And then we took the top 20 that had the most people, most customers that were impacted. That resulted in four of our substations putting into that RFO here in Lake County. And there are names for the substations. Clear Lake, Highlands, and Canocti, they basically ring the lake, and then there's another one down in Middletown. We are in the process of reviewing all of those. Like I said, we got 220 bids across the system. The timeline is pretty aggressive. They have to be operating by this fall. We are evaluating the viability of all these bids from the developer community. We're cautiously optimistic that some of them will be able to deliver, but we're still doing our due diligence on that. We expect in the next several weeks, and I don't have a precise timeline, but to come out with a short list of the ones that we think are viable, where we saw developers, and then we'll enter negotiations with those developers and then bring those contracts to the PUC.
So the developers would actually operate the generators
They
that would
would
power your substation?
They would build them and turn them over to us, and we would operate them in the event. But that's
So they'd be permanent structures when they are?
they would be permanent structures. We have a requirement as well from the PUC to add additional permanent generation to our system. So we're looking to do two birds with one stone with some of these facilities. These are, I think, from an operating standpoint, they would be facilities that wouldn't necessarily run very often. They're sort of what we call, at the tail end of our reserve margin, which is our technical term for sort of the buffer that we have to make sure, on a super hot day, 1 in 10 year kind of weather, we can have enough power. So they don't operate very often. It's the last little bit of insurance, if you will. And then obviously there's the impact with PSPS. I do want to be really open and direct that, the state has a strong preference, and we've been transitioning over a number of years to clean generation. Getting clean generation in some of these tight spots, be it solar or batteries, is going to be very challenging. We recognize that when we put this on the street, but we think all solutions need to be on the table. And then obviously in Lake County, since there is no natural gas service, that's obviously a cleaner fuel than diesel, which is the preference we've sort of stated. So there are a number of complicated issues that we have to think about as we go through this. But we thought it was important to understand what the options are, and from the development community at a minimum. So we've put it out there, and we're still vetting what they did, and let's see what we can do to try and solve some of these near-term issues.
Can you give us any more specific information about sizing of these generators for these 4 locations?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can follow up with you in terms of megawatt size.
Yes.
Is that what you're interested in?
Yes.
Okay. I would add to, you asked if they're permanent generators. Another option that we have is, and we're undergoing a series of upgrades we're looking at projects at all of these substations to do necessary work on those substations over the next several months to be able to accommodate generation. So if there isn't a permanent solution that we see from the developer community, there still is the possibility of a temporary generation solution kind of on a grid scale as opposed to all the sort of more serving medium, size facilities, temporary generation options that we deployed during the events in the fall.
I'm curious, what do you consider a large megawatt generation system and a small?
Probably I would say about a megawatt but most of the facility generators are kind of 250 kW and below. At the substations, we're talking, 5 megawatts.
5 megawatts, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Simon.
Yeah, well, I just want to follow up on that conversation there. As far as moving forward, I understand there are requirements, obviously, with air quality and other things like that that should be challenging. But I think for this season, what we're looking for in Lake County, obviously, is all the options on the table. And then looking at, you can move through the green, sorry, Sam, with the noise here. As we move through that, just to make sure we're following up on that. I know there are going to be some other meetings that are happening, and you need to communicate directly with the folks on this board and the people on the ground as we keep moving forward through that process. So very important that we get that done for next season, at least to understand what's the opportunities and what we're going to be moving forward with for 2020 PSPS season.
And you have my firm commitment that we stay connected as we understand the results from that and move forward with that process, that we communicate that early and often.
Okay.
I did want to add on the microgrid front, there are a couple other options that are obviously available. We certainly have some interested groups who've come to us to talk about developing their own microgrids, and we're providing some technical support from that perspective. We are also looking in Clear Lake at what's called a mid-feeder microgrid, which, to get technical on you, this is now a small microgrid that we can actually operate within an area where we have turned off the power.
Are you speaking of the city of Clear Lake or your Clear Lake substation?
Yes, sorry, city.
Of Clear Lake.
And the idea here is, if you have hardened assets or underground assets, you set it all up to roll temporary generation to that facility. This is something we're looking to do in a lot of rural communities where there's a downtown core that we can then power up, even though the whole area may be at fire risk. This particular area is safe, and we roll generation and have hardened the assets in that area to be able to operate that area in a PSPS only. We did a pilot last year down in Angwin. It was successful, and we are looking to replicate that in a number of locations. And our focus is on certainly the communities that were most impacted by PSPS, and I think Lake County is second, perhaps only to Butte County in the number of times that you were affected by PSPS events.
Go ahead, Bruno.
I just wanted to make one last comment before we move on. This was discussed previously by us. Appreciate that you're looking at least 4 substations to try to keep those electrified so that we can see about continuing on normal life. But at the same time, when looking at it, the entire North Shore seems to be absent from the substation. So if there's a potential possibility of a plan for the North Shore, that would be great to have that be discussed as well in the future, so we can look at that.
I have that. Part of it is that there's not a substation in every area in the county, so, yeah, we'll look at that as well.
Councilmember Mattina.
Yeah, Senator McGuire's office mentioned PG&E's 10-year timeline to work on the infrastructure and vegetation clearing, bringing that down to 3 years. Is that something PG&E is looking at?
So I think my CEO spoke at a hearing in front of you, Commissioner, about the 10-year timeline. I want to be pretty honest and direct about a 10-year timeline. San Diego had the witch fire. San Diego Gas and Electric had the witch fire in 2007 and has been on a journey much longer than we have. I would say for over 10 years. They are still doing public safety power shutoffs. They do them much more targeted and at much narrower areas, and they have figured out how to support the communities that they serve during those events, certainly a lot better than we have at this point. So I am not convinced in these fire conditions that public safety power shutoff comes out of the toolkit of the utility ever. That said, it needs to happen much less frequently and much less often, and the threshold for doing it, the kind of windstorm it would take to do it, needs to be much more severe. And as we harden assets and trim vegetation, we can get there. We did we did some unprecedented things for our business last year. We went from 3,000 to 6,000 employees working on vegetation, and we were barely able to meet our goal of doing our regular work to inspect the entire system, as well as extra vegetation removal on a third of the lines in the Tier 3 area. We hired just about every qualified electrical worker west of the Mississippi in order to be able to inspect all of our lines in 6 months. No utility has ever inspected all of their lines in 6 months. That's usually a 5-year process for our industry. So we inspected, and we didn't even inspect all of the lines. We inspected all of the lines in our Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas. And then did all the subsequent repairs on the highest priority items that we found. The qualified workforce that you need to be able to maintain that level of activity is not available right now, and is exceedingly challenging to secure, even to be able to do that for a single year. So that will certainly be one constraint. However, we are going through a process of looking at our lines and trying to figure out where the risk is greatest and where the impact is the most on PSPS. And we think that we can get at about 90% of the risk of ignition from our system in about 5 years of worth of work, with targeted hardening and targeting vegetation in the most critical areas. So we think we can reduce it. The challenges to doing that are going to, again, really be that workforce.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Kramer.
Yes, I'm going to jump around here a little bit and go back to, you spoke earlier a little bit of the CRCs, Community Resource Centers. Our county's population we have a high percentage of medically fragile. Respite centers are something that's been talked about, and what specifically, I know at one point last year, in the longest, I think it was a 6-day outage you had, there were, our supply, quite honestly, of oxygen, medical oxygen in the county was within like 6 hours of being exhausted. Do you have any plans for providing for alternatives, battery backups, for instance, being a big one for oxygen generators or CPAP machines or what have you? Have you or your company, what do you have planned for that?
So first of all, I think a critical element is the thing that I already spoke to, which is the restoration time. We've got to get the restoration time down.
I agree.
Thank you for that reinforcement on that one. I think that one is pretty well agreed upon. We have certainly heard the need for more capacity to charge medical devices at the community resource centers. So we want a broader deployment of community resource centers. I do want to really, in particular, thank the tribal governments here in Lake County who were prepared to do 4 of the 5 that we had at the maximum deployment of community resource centers. And we would not have been able to do that without their support. So really want to appreciate that. We're looking to get, and obviously we got to work with Dale to figure out what the right spread looks like for the county. We're targeting a minimum of 5 in counties. I think for more impacted counties, and especially more counties that have a lot of rural people to serve, we're going to need to go potentially even higher than that.
Yeah.
To get to your question on the battery backup, so we have provided a grant to the California Foundation of Independent Living Centers, and they'll basically provide 3 services. We're helping them buy a series of backup batteries to be able to deploy. They're also going to be providing transportation to community resource centers if someone needs to charge and then also transport and hotel vouchers for folks who are not able to shelter in place, if you will, and that's not a viable solution and they simply need to move. So that's the that's the approach that we're taking on from a backup battery standpoint.
Well, I appreciate you're doing that. Clear Lake, we had a community resource center in our community senior center that had its own generation. So we were well prepared. In fact, I believe we were probably the most used center, as we understood it, in the region. But again, it's critical, and I can't emphasize this enough, that we have that battery, the battery backup systems and the additional batteries to be available. I think that's the best way to take care of probably 90% of the problem on the respite, on the medically fragile. So.
I do want to also just mention, and I don't know if the commissioner or some of the staff want to speak to it, but there has been a pretty substantial enhancement of what's called the self-generation incentive program to focus that program, which had been previously focused on greenhouse gas emissions reductions, much more on resiliency and making batteries available with a particular focus to really enhance those incentives for the most disadvantaged, and that's not necessarily something that somebody who's struggling to get by is going to run out and buy a big battery system. Yeah. But there's very generous incentives that go a long way to covering those costs. That decision just came out in the end of January, so we are digesting that and trying to figure out how to get that program out into the market as quickly as possible, because that will provide another avenue for folks who want to have their own battery. Again, restoration time will be critical, because even if you have a battery, it's not going to last 6 days. So we've got to be better on that front.
I appreciate that thought. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I have a point of clarification?
Certainly.
These questions that we have on the list under item number 7, we'll go over those that have not yet been gone over, or do you want those questions right now, or are you asking for questions that are not listed currently?
Either one. If you see something on this list that has not yet been covered, feel free to cover it. If there's something else that has struck you today, just given the presentations, feel free to cover that as well. Oh, and also welcome Councilmember Slutin from Clear Lake.
Sorry, I'm filling in for Joyce Overton. I got a late notice, so sorry for being late. Anyway, I have a couple of questions. There seems to be no discussion so far that I've heard on undergrounding. Obviously, that's the ultimate solution. Would you agree with that?
I think it is the ultimate solution.
Okay. Thank you.
And so it is a part of the long-term plan to harden the assets. Some of them will be underground, and we expect to do significantly more undergrounding than we historically have done. I will just say, practically speaking, the cost of undergrounding is 3 to 10 times what we've experienced with traditional wire that's hung, and the places where we need to do it the most are going to be the most challenging areas to work, right? Because they're those steep, rocky hillsides. So it will be challenging, but it needs to be much more frequently used, and will be, as we look to harden all of our assets, the distribution assets in the Tier 3 area. I think the other thing that we're trying to do is remove wire where we can. We have instances where we're running 6 miles of wire up to a communication tower just because, we are a monopoly utility, and if you said you wanted power, we went ahead and did that for you. And that's probably not the best solution with some of the technology that we have available to us. So can we take wire out, put a solar and battery, maybe a small diesel generator up on that mountaintop, and not run 6 miles of wire through, fire-prone terrain?
I have a follow-up question on that. There seems to be quite a bit of 20A money available, but the problem is that PG&E has the design in order to use that money. It takes way too long. That's a big problem. There are certain projects that we could have used to use 20A money, but the design has taken too long in order to implement it. So how can we speed up that process?
Well, I would argue that the 20A program is the wrong tool for the job. It's probably like trying to use a needle as a sledgehammer. The 20A program was historically a beautification program. It really is what it was. It's priority near parks and similar items like that. And the amount of funding in there is, while there is some significant funding in there, is nothing what we need anywhere near what we need to do substantial amounts of undergrounding across a very large system. And so
It's not the where you can use it, it's the time that it takes for PG&E to design it. Can private consultants take that over?
So that's certainly, I think my understanding is that the commission is relooking at the rules around 20A right now as we speak, and looking to substantially reform that program. And I think all of those things should be on the table as part of that discussion.
I would certainly like to see that, because we had a project within the city that brand new sidewalks and all that kind of stuff, and we still have power poles. And the reason it's there because it took too long for PG&E to design the design of it. So, please.
If I could also add to the Rule 28 discussion, I just returned from the California League of Cities Board of Directors meetings, and at this meeting today, we approved the league moving forward to support increasing the purpose for Rule 20A from just being limited to a beautification to now including wildfire resilience and protection. So it'll be very interesting to see how all these stakeholders now are starting to move and look at Rule 20A to see if it can become a more effective tool to help us keep our community safe. Do we have any further questions from the ad hoc committee?
Go ahead.
Thank you. And then Supervisor.
Hi, and I
Absolutely.
just wanted to make a clarification. I think you had stated that undergrounding was kind of the ultimate solution. I'm assuming that that would be the case if the transmission that's actually feeding that underground line is actually well functioning. And just to clarify that for all the folks here.
Yeah, so as we've thought about, and why I said yes to that is, obviously the distribution assets are the most fragile that you're concerned about in a public safety power shutoff event. So we believe, and we don't have enough experience with it yet, that as we harden those assets, we cover the wire, we build stronger poles, wider configuration on the wire so wind slap is less likely, that the threshold for public safety power shutoff and outages and lines coming down will be much higher because we won't see as many instances of that. But we don't have a lot of that in the field, so we don't have great history with it. So that's why I would say undergrounding it's not gonna blow over in the wind if it's underground, right? So that's, or have a tree limb fall into it. So that's very clear. Obviously, there are instances of where some transmission lines at very high voltages have been put underground, but that's pretty preliminary technology in our industry. And so you will continue to have these major transmission lines overhead, which are, again, part of the program. And where, again, we've seen much less damage on these systems, but we have had, a couple of very prominent and catastrophic equipment failures. And so that continues to be a concern.
Thank you, Chair Simon.
Yeah, I just want to go back and reiterate today, as we open this thing up for general discussion, there's going to be conversation all over the place. But really looking at 2020 as we move forward here, I think some of the most critical things that are on top of this page, and I know you got these, is keeping the city centers up and running during PSPSs. Critical facilities, all hospitals, jails, and also our schools, as many as possible, up and running next year in 2020. Those are all going to be critical things to help you answer the problem of how do we deal with our medical fragile constituents here in Lake County, because our local fire departments and other things are overwhelmed. Calling 911 is not the opportunity for them to be taken care of. That's going to be very critical. One more time, Mr. John, I just want to make sure that we keep reiterating that focusing on those 4 spots that we have this year, adding in the 5th one for the North Shore next year, are critical components to Lake County and how we're affected next year. We cannot go through one more year like we had last year. It can't happen. Our businesses will close. Our kids will be losing more and more days of school each year on their education. It can't happen. So I really want to reiterate that. The CRCs are going to be a critical point too, because we can't take all 37,000 customers out, even though we want to. But that's what we have to work on as we move forward. There are plenty of other things on here, communication, subcontractors, all those things are going to come at you today, but I really want to be able to carry that message of what we're working on here with the microgrid systems and lighting up as many customers next year as possible through this process. And I know there's going to be steps and processes we need to go through, But I just want to reiterate that. You're going to hear that from the community and us supporting each of them and our critical facilities folks, first responders, our sheriff in the back, making sure that our jail facilities are up and we don't have to move those folks. Those are all critical things that we need to be focusing on. I'll say that a couple more times before you leave today, too. Okay. Because it needs to, we need to focus on those. CPUC is doing a good job. Commissioner Guzman being here today is something also. We see what they're working on as far as getting regulations to pass down to you guys for communication, how you're working with local governments, and we'll continue to support her in that process. But those are the critical issues for Lake County here, and I appreciate everybody on this board, but we're going to keep saying it till you walk out that door, and we'll continue calling you. So that's all I got to say.
Message received. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments from members of the committee?
I do want to bounce off that last line that was made. Behind you there is a map. This was actually created for us by Supervisor Brown working with staff, I believe. And these are our low-risk communities. Basically, there are community growth boundaries, our agricultural land, ones that are not so far off that they go into the open space areas and the rural areas. But this is where the bulk of our communities live. This is where we have our urban-rural interface. Where the majority of people do their commerce, where people go to school, where our hospitals and our jails and everything is located. And so these are the areas that we really want to highlight for you to take back to PG&E and say these are the areas we do not want to see taken down and de-energized, and please do everything you can to make sure that these locations are the last ditch effort of a bad weather situation that is out of control, that these are the last options for you to take out. So we just want to make sure you have that map. We'll go ahead and make sure you have that in your email. But this is what we believe are safe areas. Our fire districts do a great job of protecting us in those areas. We typically don't have huge wildfires in those areas unless they start outside and come through, unfortunately, like the Valley Fire. But these are areas that we feel are more safe and more secure, and those are not the electrical wires that we're worried about in comparison to those that are out in the rural areas and the rural lands and whatnot. So this is our message to you is please work on getting those areas lit.
Great point, Supervisor Spatier. These are also the areas that have the infrastructure available already where our people in more rural areas can congregate and get the clean air and the power. Thank you. Are there any further?
You could send that to us.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
And those are the areas where the four generators,
Those are the areas where the
four
are
substations are located.
So just one more backup on, we have an opportunity there.
Anything further from the ad hoc committee?
I do have something to say. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to speak about PG&E. I'm going to say you, but it's not you. It's PG&E as a whole. But I feel like there is a little bit of a trend that comes from PG&E, and I want to figure out how to stop this trend. We're being told that you're working on these things, that you're going to mitigate the problem. I know that we really want to focus on 2020, but I also want to not lose focus on the future years as well to make sure we mitigate this problem and eventually not never have to deal with it and talk about it as if it's in the past. So I'm going to start in 2017. I live in the city of Clear Lake. Power pole number 1447 means something to me. That is the power pole that started the sulfur fire on October 8th at 11:55 p.m. 162 homes were lost. According to Lakeport News, in your response to the CAL FIRE conclusion, again, PG&E's response, PG&E said that it meets or exceeds regulatory requirements for pole integrity, yet the pole snapped in half. However, the CAL FIRE report stated that woodpeckers had gutted the center of the PG&E power pole, putting acorns inside of it and making it weak. The pole then went down and started the fire. So the message from PG&E is it meets or exceeds, but then the visual and the reality is it does not. Then we can move on to another horrific, luckily not here locally, but Tower 27-222, which is in Paradise, just outside of Paradise for the campfire, where a live wire broke off and sparked a fire and killed 85 people. According to the New York Times, a company email had noted that some of PG&E's structures in the area, known for fierce winds, were at risk of collapse. It reported corrosion of one tower so severe that it endangered crews trying to repair the tower. The company's own guidelines put Tower 27-222 a quarter century beyond its useful life, but the tower remained. So again, there was evidence that something was not up to par, but the fix had not been done, and yet here we are discussing about a horrific event. As you know, in I believe it was 2011 or 2012 in San Bruno, where PG&E was found guilty and convicted of 6 felony counts, which was also failure to gather and integrate relevant data to identify all potential threats, failure to maintain certain repair records, failure to identify and evaluate potential threats. This was the message from PG&E, and this was from the Mercury News on January 26, 2017. We want San Bruno and all of the communities we serve, which would include us, all the communities you serve, to know that we at PG&E have committed ourselves to a goal of transforming this company into the safest and most reliable energy provider in America. And that was January 26, 2017. This was previous to the sulfur fire and previous to the Camp Fire. So the words do not necessarily match the actions. You're telling us again in words that you're planning to fix this, and I want to know how is the communication with us going to be more transparent when you have knowledge that some of these poles or some of your infrastructure is not up to date and is faulty? Right now, I get it that you are a private company, a private corporation, but we are all your customers, and we all have to deal with the aftermath of your infrastructure. I need PG&E to work with us to let us know where your problems are so we can be aware of the problems, so we can be a part of the solution with you, rather than you be silent and us have absolutely no knowledge until another investigation happens and occurs. And so words for me aren't enough. I want us to have the action of collaboration. I want us to know what's going on with your infrastructure, and I want us to know how we can work better together to make sure that I don't have to read another comment like this from PG&E saying that everything was well when it's not. So, and I'm asking for an answer. How do we be more transparent with one another so that we're aware of what is going on, so I don't have to look in my backyard? I was lucky enough, about 1,000 feet from my house, the sulfur fire stopped. But 162 structures were not so lucky. And in other fires, definitely not so lucky. In fact, in that fire, we're very fortunate that there were no fatalities or anyone was harmed, as many had to go and drive through fires on both sides. So I'm asking for an answer because I think it's important that we work together in transparency to make sure that we are solving the solution. What is a measurable, how can we measure something so that we can say, okay, we've done this much? I don't know how many power poles you have here. I don't know how many power poles you've inspected. I don't know how many miles of wires you've inspected. But I would suspect that that's important for all of us to know that information so that we can share with our fire districts, so we can share with our sheriffs, so we can share with everyone so they're aware of the safety potential of your infrastructure that you have here. I recognize it's going to take time, but I would like to see what the plan is so that we can be a part of the plan.
Yes.
So, you know, as someone who's proud of the work that they do and where I work and the men and women that I work with, I don't really relish hearing those kind of stories and all of that, but it's the reality. And I want to acknowledge that. We have a lot of work to do as a company to earn back the trust of the folks up here and the folks out there. A way that we start, to get to your question of how we do it, having worked increasingly with emergency management and local officials over the last couple of years with the public safety power shutoff program, there's a real realization that we have not been transparent enough locally with what we need to do and what the state of our assets is and all of the actions that we're up to. You know, we're doing this across 47 counties. Well, that's great, thank you very much, but what are you doing here locally? What is the state of the infrastructure here locally? One of the things we did when we were inspecting all of the lines the last year is we put up on a public website once a month what the number of things that we'd found. And so we had that, and we were transparent about what we were finding. And we were putting that up on a public website monthly as we were inspecting all of the assets. I think that sort of move to transparency is the way that we show you that we're engaging. I think the other piece is my core responsibility, which is to sit down and organize a team of people that's going to go out on a county-by-county basis, on a tribe-by-tribe basis, and have that conversation about the state of the infrastructure. You know, with PSPS, it starts right with, you know, help me understand how the grid works, right? Why is this turned off and this not, right? We didn't do a good enough job. It makes no sense. This area is not windy. You know, sit with folks and help them understand how that is. So I think the actions that we have to take are the things that we want to start this spring, really using local emergency management as the organizing point for that, to say, let's sit down and look at what the hardening infrastructure plan is here in Lake County. Let's look at what the vegetation management plan is here in Lake County. Yeah, we're doing this area and we're not doing that. And let me explain to you why. How did we risk rank this? How did we prioritize? You may not like that we're not doing the entire county first, but if the answer is we're not starting there, I should be able to tell you and articulate why there's some other area that was at higher risk. That's why we focused in that area. So you read a bunch of words that didn't resonate for you and weren't necessarily lived. So I'm not sure there's any words that I can say to add on to that list, and I don't want to try. I want to show you by action. So I think the thing that you should be looking for is the work that we're doing with the staff of this county that have, I think, a responsibility for a lot of that core infrastructure kind of conversation, and be asking them if we're showing up differently over the spring and early summer as we're getting ready for, hopefully what will be a much more mild PSPS season.
I know I had the opportunity to speak to you earlier and share a couple of things, but for the benefit of the public here, we are also tired of the words and want to see some actions and commitments. And I, as I did earlier, want to invite you to come to us with specifics on what that looks like. We've certainly put out proposals on the PSPS front and on the bankruptcy front. And just on, as an example, one of the things that we have put forward is to get in place the working groups with the local governments and the sharing of data with the local governments, both through a portal and through communications. That's something that doesn't need to wait. And having that establishment, certainly we will most likely be directing that, but that can start today. And from what I've heard already in the notes that you shared, and even in something that was shared earlier today, and not having already today the establishment of a clear list of community resource centers as a basic minimum should be put in place. So really invite you to give us that specific feedback on what you need in terms of a commitment and relationship that you're expecting in terms of that constant communication and improved transparency. You should know where all the poles are. You should know where the inspection status is. That is something that you need as a protection for your citizens. And want to just talk about, obviously, the immediacy for the fall, but also just highlight that in the bankruptcy proceeding that we have, we are also asking the question on the regionalization of PG&E and what that needs to look like. So really, I know it's a lot of comment, but use us in the context that we provided you today to give us what that looks like to you. What does the regionalization of PG&E look like so that they can be more in touch with their customers?
Anything further from the ad hoc committee? Alan.
So one more item. I know we've had multiple opportunities to talk with members of PG&E's team about communication from PG&E to us, and we'll have more opportunities next week to talk to some of your team about that. But I wanted to make sure the point was made with you, since you're here, that because I've heard you mention a couple of times about communicating through local OES. These are not declared disasters, and that has not always worked for us as cities to get relevant and timely information. And so PG&E needs to have a plan to communicate directly with all municipalities and not through OES.
Good point.
This is Rajan Mutiala from the CPUC. I just wanted to follow up with you. The commission has an ongoing poll database rulemaking where we're trying to make some of the statistics on polls from each of the major electric IOUs and the communications utilities as well available to commercial interests to attach, items. However, given the necessity for local governments to have access to this information, that could be something that could be considered to have local governments gain access to this poll database, where, it's also assisting the safety division to determine, what particular information we need to do our audits and inspections as well. So it's going to help our process and hopefully help your process. So that's ongoing right now. And so we can get back to you in terms of how to intervene in that process.
And I will add that with our conversation with the CPUC, they did discuss about a more proactive inspection plan on the infrastructure as well. Just wanted to make sure the public was aware that that's being approached and being worked on.
All right, committee, public, y'all have been very, very patient. We are moving now to the public input section. In order to let everybody be comfortable, we're going to start on this side. First of all, can you raise your hand if you have input that you wanted to share with us today? Super. That's not too bad. Okay, so we're going to start on this side of the room so that you don't have to stand in line. We're going to start with the first row and going back. If there's someone who wants to speak, feel free to come forward. Is there anyone in the first row? Come on. And if you could state your name clearly for the record, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'm Pollyann Johnston, and I'm just listening to everything, and I'm hearing, maybe I'm not hearing it right, but what I'm hearing is we're thinking about this, maybe in the fall, we're going to do this. What are you doing right now? Fire season is around the corner. What has been done in the year to prepare us so it's not like it was? I don't hear definite things that have been done for now and not going to do it or thinking about it. Thank you.
Was that question directed towards somebody, or?
Whoever wants to answer.
Well, I guess I can respond from the county standpoint. This is our second year of our vegetation abatement ordinance from the county standpoint. I know community development, obviously, going out, there's going to be inspection processes that are happening. We talked about our most prone areas, the Rivieras, and other places like that that need to be taken care of. So from the county standpoint, I can talk about those things will be happening and moving forward the process this year. I think if you're asking directly for PG&E, then Mr. Johnson would have to answer. But I know we're being proactive, and we're looking for PG&E to be that same partner. And one other thing we'll be doing in March every year, we do for our public utilities, other folks that are coming through here, we do a proclamation from the board to make everybody aware that they have responsibility, including the county, to make sure that everyone's doing everything they can to protect our neighbors and make sure we're a fire-wise community as we move forward. And we expect that of all of our utilities that come through the county also.
So I would say, we spoke about some of the plans for the microgrids and stuff. Those are long lead time projects. So, we are taking the actions you can to put that in place right now. Some of the concrete actions that we're taking on infrastructure are changing. We've changed the standard on how we trim vegetation around our assets. So one highlight of that, we've targeted certain species that have a history of falling into our lines, even if they're further back than the clearance. We would just remove some of those species. We got to get permission sometimes to do it from the landowner, but we're doing that. We've also historically, you may have gone along a road and seen one of those holes they cut through trees around the wire, which meets the compliance requirement to keep it 4 foot at all times. We try and trim back to 12. We're not doing that anymore. We're taking out the overhang. So we were able to do that in about 1/3 of the vegetation all across our territory last year, and we're looking to do another 1,800 miles this year. And that work is ongoing as we speak. There are men and women out doing that work right now. We're also, we hardened, which basically means either taking out, undergrounding, or using covered wire and stronger poles. We did 170 miles last year, and we're looking to do another 220 this year. And people are either designing or in the field hanging wire and digging holes for poles right now as we speak. So I think it was sort of recognized up here that the long-term change of the infrastructure is that's an ongoing process that will take years, and we'll chip away at it, and we'll chip at the areas that are the most at risk and the areas that are most impacted by PSPS. Those are the areas we're targeting first. And then obviously in our general office, we're trying to design a better PSPS program so the communication that folks are asking for is better. And the way that we actually operate those events runs a lot smoother than it did. Obviously, doing everything we can to minimize that goes along with that. But I mean, those are some of the examples of the things that people are working on as we speak.
How many miles in Lake County have you redone?
I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head, so we'll follow up.
Okay, anyone left in the first row? Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Joyce.
Oh, I'm Joyce Steingass from the CPUC Energy Division, and I wanted to mention that the commission has a proceeding open that examines what are the short lead time resiliency and microgrid solutions that could be aggressively addressed prior to the next fire season. And so there are staff proposals under consideration that involve determining what steps can be taken to prioritize and streamline interconnection applications for resiliency services at key sites and locations. The commission is looking at changing some of the tariffs that would allow, for example, allowing energy storage batteries to charge from the grid prior to a PSPS so that they're ready for a PSPS. There's a key part that I think Lake County would be interested in. It's how to facilitate local governments' access to utility infrastructure and planning data to support the development of resiliency projects. And for those proposals, there's 4 ideas that are under consideration. One would be to link with the working groups that the commissioner mentioned earlier. And as Mr. Johnson mentioned, having workshops with each of the counties that are impacted by Tier 2 and Tier 3 fire areas so that collaboration and communication can occur in a more expedited fashion. Another one is to increase the utility resources that are dedicated to interconnections so that more solutions can be done before fire season. And the final one is a engagement guide to help local governments with either behind the meter or in front of the meter microgrid solutions, such as for communities or critical facilities. There's another issue that may be moved into the next track, which is more about the data portals that people spoke of, which would be data portals that provide more transparent information about infrastructure, but more focused on what information do local governments or community aggregators need in order to design, plan, and build microgrids. Another thing in this proceeding is that the investor-owned utilities, such as PG&E and the other 2 in the state, were asked to put forward what proposals can they expedite prior to fire season. And PG&E put forward 3 proposals that are under consideration by the commission right now. The commission is working in a very aggressive fashion to work in really with unprecedented speed. In the case of the PG&E proposal, I think 50 stakeholders provided 1,000 pages of feedback that the staff has been gleaning, and we're working with the commissioners and our leadership to determine how fast those ideas can be implemented. Included among them were the Make Ready program to equip the substations, a temporary generation program to provide diesel generators for prior to 2020 fire season, and a novel concept that many of us are appreciative of is that PG&E put forward a proposal to create a community microgrid enablement program where they would put staff, electric distribution engineers, and other people with expertise who could work directly with local government on ideas where to site microgrids or resiliency solutions and provide technical advice and guidance on how to accomplish those things. So these ideas are not yet finalized yet, but they're on a fast track to be determined and implemented prior to 2020 fire season. So I just wanted to share that.
If I could just add one thing, I know I have perhaps fallen short on giving you a lot of Lake County specifics in some instances, and just so you understand, the plan that we had been building towards is to, starting late winter, is to come back with all of this information for those local discussions where we can show you both work done in the last year, work done being planned for this year across vegetation management, hardening, where we're doing inspections, the whole, to sort of go through that. So there are actually teams that are breaking apart our larger work plans into a more localized presentation material so we can begin to have those conversations at that level of detail. So if you were asking me a month from now, I'd have better answers for you on a lot of that. And the plan is to be back here in March and having that conversation.
Thank you. Is there anyone further from the first row?
It's an invitation. My name is Gene Plano, and I represent a small part of Region 3. That's Pillsbury and Blue Lakes, and East and Upper Lake. But whatever I learn from having my invitation, that is having someone knowledgeable from PG&E come over and speak at our next board meeting. We're an advisory board, legally an arm of the supervisors. Whatever we advise goes up to the supervisors. We will pass on to the other advisory boards. So you're invited to come, and I'll try to pack the house when you come with as many people as possible for your speakers to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you for that invitation. Let's talk after.
We'll move on to the second row. Carol.
And I will stand just because I can sit longer.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Cole-Lewis from Upper Lake. I'm an independent solar consultant. So my question actually is to the CPUC mostly, and to some of PG&E. You mentioned briefly about the self-generation incentive program, or the SGIP program. I know there were considerable changes made to that program at the end of last year, which look like Lake County low-income residents could be eligible for, especially homeowners. However, there's two parts to that program, which I have some questions about. First of all, Lake County, as you might know, our homeowners are not eligible for the low-income programs such as SASH and DASH because our air is so good. So that, to me, first of all, just completely takes out a lot of our low-income homeowners from actually establishing microgrids on their own homes, first of all. So I'm wondering, one, what's being done about that to basically secure resiliency for Lake County and other rural areas for low-income solar? That's first of all. Secondly, with the resiliency equity budget line, there is an issue with that. The problem is that you have to qualify for the low-income programs to actually be eligible for that equity resilient budget. So our low-income people are not eligible. First, and then the other question that I have about that is the fact that what's the point of even having a battery if you're not qualifying solar to actually provide energy to that? It doesn't make sense to me, because if you're talking about resiliency, there is no resiliency if you just have the battery. So what about a program for Lake County residents and other rural areas, which would be a kilowatt hour whatever the incentive program is that would enable Lake County residents to get a complete microgrid solution for their home. What is being done about that?
Okay, we do have a SCHIP staff here, so if you could, I could invite you. Yeah, well, you are correct that it only works well with solar.
Can you please either stand at that mic or get cozy in there and use the commissioner's mic? Thank you.
Right. Currently, you are correct that yeah, sorry. I'm Asal Esfahani. I'm analyst at Energy Division. So the SASH program, which doesn't have a DAC component, is out of funding, and DAC-SASH has that DAC component in it. So for solar, you're correct that we don't have a budget in place that maybe Lake County residents can take advantage of. For the SCHIP equity resiliency budget, which would only cover storage, you don't have to be in a DAC. So you can
It's
be
an
in
option.
low income.
You have to qualify for the equity budget, though.
The equity budget allows you to live anywhere.
We'll take it offline.
Okay, all right. But just for general knowledge, equity budget does not require you to be low income, and the equity resiliency budget, if you're living in HFTD, the tier 2 or tier 3 high fire threat designated regions, you would be eligible. So you don't have to be in a DAC.
We'll talk because it's not very clear. I'd like to have a
Yes, it's not very clear, and we are working on outreach and messaging that is clear. Those programs aren't open yet, but that's what we're working on right now, that to make sure that once they are open, the residential program opens March 1st, so very soon. Non-residential program opens April 1st. But we are working on making it clear so that people can take advantage of those programs and they're not confused.
And just prior to this afternoon's meeting, we did commit to working with supervisors and local government on having a more specific forum or workshop on the self-generation incentive program, both for residents, but also particularly for schools. And there is a big eligibility opportunity. Now, the solar component would have to be obviously limited to our regular net energy metering tariff. There's not currently an existing incentive program for high fire zone areas.
Thank you. Come on up, Olga.
Good afternoon. Thanks for this opportunity. I really want to thank you all for putting this together and for inviting the public to listen to this pretty amazing and comprehensive update. So I have comment. I have an invite.
Some of us know you, but
Oh, did I not
yourself.
introduce myself? I'm Olga Martin-Steele, and I wear a lot of hats, but today I'm here speaking for Lake County Community Radio. So the comment is, I was really happy to hear the input, but especially Supervisor Simon, thank you for focusing on what's happening next, the next PSPS. Understand probably will be one, maybe shorter in scope and other things, but it does look like we're looking for more of what we had last year. The idea of the number of resource centers and that are available would really urge you to look at expanding the program you had last year for all the reasons that have been discussed. And I'm glad you are looking at all the ADA compliance issues, but we know, and we know this from radio and from what our people tell us, and also from the nonprofits that we all belong to, that there were some really serious close misses. I think, you know, the stars lined up that we didn't lose anybody last year because elderly people, isolated people slept in their cars to stay warm. I know, we all know that cannot happen again. But I also have an invite. So we have a local community radio station. And some of the issues you're talking about, we've been talking about. I would love to have, I invite you all, county, city, CPUC, PG&E. We might give you a little bit of a hard time, but we will give you an opportunity or a representative to let the public, the general public, know what's going on and where you're at with your committee deliberations, where you're at with your advocacy, where you're at with your progress, and we can do that for you. The ask is that we're just a nonprofit, and we would sure like a generator, because when the county seat shut down last time, we're staffed with volunteers. We don't get paid for doing what we do. When it shut down, we had a volunteer that brought in a generator so that we could keep the lines of communication open to the greater Lake County. We don't come into Middletown, and I'm so sorry about that, but we stream live.
They stream live now.
So keep those, keep the computers up and keep us up. Because we are, I think, one of many, but we are probably the only communications resource that this county has that is available to step up on moment's notice and get the information out that needs to get out. So you're invited to help us during those times, emergency times, but you're also invited to come on any kind of basis. I'm the president. I didn't say that I am the president of Lake County Community Radio. So I have a little bit of authority I can use, but I would welcome and invite you on some kind of a regular basis to come in and give us updates, because what we're doing, lacking that information, is we're talking to people who are really frustrated because they don't know what's going on. And as we all know, we fear what we don't know probably more than the reality. So that's the invite. And the ask is help us out with the generator.
Where's your station at?
We are located right here in Lakeport. So when the county seat shut down last year, we brought in a volunteer, brought in their generator. Actually brought it in, this is how great our volunteers are, brought it in so that we could cover, we could let people know what services are available, where are the resource centers, what do they do at these centers, what do you get, what don't you get. We're pretty much it for that. And it's because of volunteers that we were able to do that, and we're ready to do it again if needed. But in the meantime, we would sure like to help you keep the communications going to the people on the ground. They're frustrated and they're scared. Thank you.
Ogla, why don't you give that station name and number again?
KPFZ, KPFZ 88.1 FM, Community Radio Lakeport, Clear Lake, and beyond.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks for the time again. A big thanks to the staff that pulled this together. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Alan. And thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Olga.
Super. Anyone else from row 2? If not, we'll go to row 3. Row 4. Next, row 5. Thank you.
Hello, my name's John Noel. With me is my wife, Karen. We have a unique perspective to offer you today in that we are brand new to your community. We were born and raised in Southern California. Yeah, I'm sorry. Our daughter got smart enough 17 years ago, she married a local here. So for the past 17 years, we've been driving up to visit them and now our grandkids. And when I retired, we finally got smart and said, why are we still here in Southern California? Why aren't we up there in the middle of God's country? So we came this past November. I have a couple things to share with you today. The first one is my career was 3.5 decades in the fire service in the second largest city in the country. And I can't tell you how many countless days and hours we spent responding to wires down during those infamous Santa Ana events that have been occurring for the millennia. I can't express to you the number of resources that had to be committed, and I'm confident that the public service folks here today would also remind you that every time that occurs, the demand on their resources is phenomenal. And in fact, more often than not, I'm confident they, like we, went into a degraded mode of dispatch, which absolutely impacted our ability to respond to all the other incidents that were occurring simultaneously. I bring that up because when we got up here and I learned about PSPS, I was truly appalled that they would add those words, public service, well, they're shutting off your power. Because historically, what that meant to us in the fire service is on the hottest, driest, windiest, most dangerous days of the year, you're going to shut off the power to the people who medically need it the most. And that to me is unconscionable that that could even occur. And to see that discussions like this are occurring and you're even putting together massive plans to improve that process boggles my mind. I was incredibly pleased to hear him talk about the true issue here, and that is undergrounding. Undergrounding is the only thing that's ever going to solve and stop these nightmares. But like I say, these nightmares have been going on for decades. In the history of the power service, of course, power line downs have been responsible for countless fires. Power lines, if you were to go to the state's Department of Insurance, where they list the 20 worst fires in the history of our state, do you realize how many of them were caused by power service? It is mind-boggling. The number of fires, the amount of property lost, the number of lives lost is unconscionable. No arsonist in the history of fire has ever destroyed as much property or killed as many people. And undergrounding is truly the only way we're ever going to potentially resolve that issue. So I would suggest to you, great thoughts and great things are occurring here, but probably instead of erecting those new power poles on the way to Hidden Valley today, they ought to have trenchers out there, because that's the only thing that's going to stop this madness that has been occurring for decades and been perpetrated upon us. And that's not why we came here today. We came here today to remind you there is another consequence that has occurred as a result of these massive fires, many of which have been caused by the electrical industry, and that is our insurance and trying to live in these areas. I was tickled pink to hear the Senator's office discuss that they are meeting and working on those insurance issues. If you would have told Karen and I 4 months ago when we decided to come here that when we attempted to apply for insurance, we were going to be turned down 9 times out of 10. And this is for a guy, I came here and I looked at that property right on that picture up there where we reside, right between Riviera Heights and Buckingham, and I said, okay, they've done a great job over the years, but I will tell you that since we moved in, we have spent countless hours and countless thousands of dollars hardening our property against fire, because 3.5 decades of chasing fire up and down the state, I thought I had an idea what it would take to make our home fire safe. And then we applied for insurance. 9 times out of 10, oh, there's no way you live in this high fire area. We can't insure you. Wow, I said, would you just send someone out to look? No, we don't send people out to look. We look at pictures and we use ISO ratings to determine whether or not we should take a chance on you. But we finally got one. We finally got an insurance quote here for $20,310.93 a year. We can now insure our property only against fire, just for fire. Yeah. So that went on for a little while, and finally Karen and I said, we can't be the only ones in this boat. So we went to our neighbors, the Riviera Heights Homeowners Association, said, hey, are you folks having this same issue? They said, oh, are we ever? And if you look at their website, you realize that there are countless individuals throughout the area having this issue. They said, you're more than welcome to come up. We're having one of our meetings. Come up and join us, and we'll share with you what's going on. We were tickled pink to discover that they are a fire-wise community, as are many of the communities out there. They have spent a fortune on clearing. There's been new ordinances established to clear vacant lots. They've spent a fortune on building fire breaks, and now they have put together a task force that is working with Buckingham, and they are working with the Kelseyville Fire Protection District as of this past Wednesday, who put together an ad hoc committee to look at putting the fire station back in that used to reside in the Riviera Heights in order to meet that 5-mile threshold, which time and time again, as we were attempting to get insurance, came into play. You're not within 5 miles. So that takes in all of Soda Bay and most of Buckingham.
Mr. Knoll, thank you very much for your input. Let's bring it on home.
So I came here just to share with you today that that's a huge issue, and fiscally it is going to be a massive issue for this state and this county. The state recognizes it. They actually have addressed it. They put together a significant document that identifies many of these issues and many of the solutions, and I would encourage you, our representatives, you, sir, our representative from the industry, and the Senator's office, to please work as diligently as you can to let us know what we need to do in order to meet whatever requirements are going to be established to get reasonable insurance before it is fiscally too late for your county and this state.
Thank you. Was there anyone further from row number 5? All right, so we'll move to row 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is right before the chairs in the back. Anyone? Thanks, Chief White. Anyone from the back chairs section? Come on up.
Gwyneth Jones, I live in the Lakeport outside the city limits. I'm about 150 yards from the Lakeport city line.
Ms. Jones, right before you start, sorry to interrupt, if we could keep it to 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather not use the timer, but if we could be
And it'll be quick.
concise and move through. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a PSPS at the end of October for 5 days. My information sources were KNTI and KCBS in San Francisco. KCBS announced that my power would be back on after 3 days, and then there would be another PSPS for 2 days, except some areas wouldn't get their power turned back on. How come I knew that would include Lake County? Communication needs to be a lot better because not everybody in this county has a smartphone or is on the internet. What needs to be done is either send updates to the senior center or through the community resource centers that people can access who are not on the internet or have a smartphone. When your power goes out and you're on the internet, you don't have any at your residence. What was the other thing? Anyway, so yeah, communication needs to be a lot better. Oh, and when PG&E comes and does their pruning, they're leaving the wood at the side of the road because they don't have the money to chip it or take it away. This has happened on Bridge Arbor South and Todd Road.
Do you answer that one, Mr. Johnson? The wood issue.
So on the wood issue, generally what we do, our general policy is if the wood is more than 4 inches in diameter, we cut and stack that wood and leave it for the resident to dispose. If it's less than 4 inches, then we chip it on the spot.
That's not what's happening on Bridge Arbor South.
So where we're doing that enhanced vegetation, where we're clearing out that overhang, that's obviously a lot more wood than we've historically removed, or when we're removing whole trees, we are taking all of that wood. Occasionally, there is a lag between when they remove that wood and the job, but if you have a specific instance, we have a couple of folks here, and we'd love to get the information on that, and we'll look into that and get back to you.
Thank you. Betsy? Oh, please state your name for the record.
Certainly. Thank you very much. My name is Betsy Kahn. I am a programmer and program producer for KPFZ Radio, and I've been covering disasters in Lake County since 2012. I'm furthermore a senior citizen and live in the North Shore. Thank you, Bruno, for bringing that up. I live in Upper Lake. We have 2 blocks of undergrounded power with facilities that are immediately available to set up for assistance. My office is on Main Street, the Essential Public Information Center. What I do is I provide information from all kinds of resources. I broadcast it on the radio, and I go to the senior centers and sites of disaster response. I was thankful for the center that we had last fall, but I certainly witnessed a lot of the difficulties. And the other thing is about the economics of this energy, whatever, availability for the microgrids for human beings. Okay, I work with the homebound participants in Meals on Wheels programs. Even if they had the microgrids, it would be really tough for them to maintain those, to maintain the batteries, to do all those things. And those are some of the people that have that durable medical equipment that's life-sustaining, electricity-driven, that has battery problems. And we know Dr. Pace is here. He's the one that reported that we were almost out of oxygen because senior center managers met with the Department of Social Services, the various department heads that are responsible for our services. We met with the sheriff. We met with Chief Cepeda, who's sitting right here. And we were told that we were on our own, that because there would be no disaster declared when the power went out. And so we went out and made immediate contact with our responsible people that we take care of. And of course, we've done risk assessments since the 2018 fire in our senior center in Lucerne, and we know the specific risks of each of those individuals. We also know they are not capable of doing the work, of installing a system, of doing all that kind of stuff. We really need a program for those folks. We need, in our senior center in Lucerne, we are in the poorest community in the county of Lake, which has 66% of the population at 125% of the federal poverty level or below. 66%. So that community desperately needs help. We're right in the WUI, where the fire from the ranch fire nearly came down. We have ancient infrastructure, horrible roads, leaky water systems. We just have a very, very poor community, and we really need your help. Thank you.
Bear with me, I'm a little nervous. I don't like speaking in public. My name is Kathleen O'Connor. I live here in Lakeport. And I don't like working face-to-face in groups with people and stuff, but I do a lot of stuff on the computer, doing social media, and for the last 2 years, I've spent a great deal of time developing and working with contacts that do GIS data, fire and weather and so forth, and then putting it in plain English and sharing it on social media platforms. So I, do diligence on vetted sources and stuff in order to help get the information out. So I do have some experience on how difficult and how the lack of timeliness and clarity affected, someone like me who likes to read and everything, and I was struggling and grappling with, well, what does that mean? Before I could share it with other people. So indeed, communications are key, working with the infrastructure, having focal points, hubs, in a place like Lake County where everyone is pretty much spread out. So like things like the churches, the senior centers need to be hardened because those are hubs. Those are places that when something happens, that's where people go. We're already familiar with those, and a lot of people don't rely on digital media at all, period. Unless it's their cable, which is, in order to save money, their telephone as well. So when the cable goes out, their phone goes out. I still keep a landline for that very reason, so that I can communicate when the power goes out. Also, the undue burden on every resident here for the multiple events that happened. We were really super prepared for the first one, but not the next 3 back to back. It killed us. It absolutely killed us. So disabled people, even though I don't seem disabled, I am. And that creates another burden and difficulty in order to cope. And the cumulative effect, since, let's see, the Wi-Fi was in 2009, and then since 2015, we've had, 8 fires back to back practically. And so between the air pollution and the stress, a lot of us have PTSD now because of it. And so we need more funding for behavioral health to help work with these hubs in order to take care of our communities. And I just wanted to say that. So, I volunteer as I can as just an individual person, but we need more funding for all these people that do this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, my name's Sky Hoyt. I know many of you. I've known some of you for more than a decade. I was a local food farmer here in Lake County from 1985 to 2015. So I don't think I'm going to say anything to you right now that was redundant. I have really 3 points. The first is that in November of last year, after the October PSPS event, I did organize a small group tour of the Santa Rosa Junior College microgrid project. Olga Martin-Steele was one of the participants. From that experience, she was motivated to start a recurring radio show about PSPS and microgrids. So that was a big positive development locally. One of the other things that we observed in this tour was there clearly was 2 pathways. There were relatively small users of energy had one pathway. Large users of electricity, which the Santa Rosa Junior College would appear to be, was another different pathway. What I'm here to say to this group is what we saw there was an incredible wealth of information, and that large users of electricity need to get access to that. And I'd like to see this committee take it upon one of your responsibilities to organize another group tour of that facility for large users of electricity. I know you can do it. We've got numerous business sectors and that need this kind of information. It was a phenomenal educational experience. So that's a recommendation. I hope one of you will take it on. I'm happy to help you share all the experience we had, how we organized. The man running the project there is brilliant. I mean, it was really a great experience. First point done. Second point is, when PSPS came up as an idea, I almost immediately became an anti-PSPS activist. The reason for that is that I rely on pumping groundwater. And I relied on pumping groundwater essentially all of my agricultural career. And what I've really found from this process is there's an incredible number of people who don't pump their own groundwater. I was unaware. There's so many people that are on public water systems, their water just comes to them, that this is an area that's missed. To go out, it's not like going and getting a little generator and hooking an extension cord in your refrigerator. Pumping groundwater is a much bigger deal. You really need a professional to do it. You need technical advice. The investments are not in hundreds of dollars, there's in thousands of dollars. I mean, this is a really big deal. I don't think it's getting the attention that it needs. Just to go into a little more detail. Residential people, yeah, you need water for bathing and drinking and flushing the toilet and all that, and that's important. People who want to engage in any kind of self-sufficient agricultural living, like growing their own food or having livestock, it's a much bigger deal. The quantities of water are greater. This is, to me, super important to the Lake County lifestyle. This PSPS interfering with irrigation and livestock water is endangers the actual quality of life that we have here. We're not putting enough attention on this. Moving over to commercial agriculture, the investment required of commercial agriculture to provide standby pumping systems for all the water that we need is horrendous. I'm so glad there's a farmer on this committee. Thank you, Russ. So this is huge. I mean, and I think, agriculture is the largest industry in Lake County. It's really important to remember that. We tend to take agriculture for granted because the people in agriculture are very self-sufficient. They just kind of get out there and do it. This is a huge economic burden. Okay, staying on with the water now. Those who are into the climate change debate, and I don't want to get into that, but I want to say to you that last fall, during the PSPS event, in Scotts Valley, where I live, we saw bona fide climate events that had never happened before at that time. We saw temperatures fall, minimum morning temperatures fall below 20 degrees in the second week of October. That's unprecedented. For those who don't cultivate crops, they say this, they also happened without progressive cold, which makes the plants strong to resist frost. This was an unprecedented frost event. So as we're looking at PSPS and we're looking at the supply of water and you throw in the climate change, this is a huge danger to agriculture and it needs to be paid attention to. I saw a young walnut orchard that's come into bearing next to my house, about 15 feet tall. It went from green leaves to black leaves in 24 hours. Now that man, there's a walnut farmer. He'll tell you that kind of stuff doesn't happen on October 10th. It's unprecedented. Scotts Valley was colder than Big Valley, but anyway, it's a big effect. We shouldn't overlook it. Now this is my third point. This is a really small one, relatively. So the generation incentive program, right, SGIP, I still haven't really gotten a clear answer. Does that have to be generated with renewables, or can a person who's made a generator investment, can they just go get batteries and reduce their generator running time? That's a fairly simple question.
Paul, can
Is
you
that good?
answer that?
Yeah,
Thank you.
back to your point about climate change. Yeah, the ESTA program So there is, in the legislation, SGIP, any project, whether it's storage or not, that receives SGIP incentives needs to reduce GHG emissions. I can give you my contact information because thinking about it now, if you want to install storage that's connected to generation that you already have installed, I'm not sure if that's prohibited. I don't think I've ever received that question before, but yeah, in terms of if it is working with non-renewable generation, if that is going to increase GHGs in any way, then it wouldn't work. But
What was that last acronym?
Greenhouse gases.
yes, green gas house, yes.
The alphabet soup of the world.
Yeah, GHG is greenhouse gas emissions. So it's in the legislations. The CPUC, our policy can't diverge from what's in statute. So
No. That was the answer, was no, you think?
I think no.
Okay, well, it's an important thing because many people.
All right, thank you. So as our next speaker is coming, let's see a show of hands for anyone still waiting for public input. Okay, we're going to start the timer.
I'll keep it quick.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is California Howland, and I'm from Cobb area.
One moment,
County.
Cal, just a second. technical
He was going to beat the
challenges.
timer anyways.
Yeah, right? Super.
I'm here on behalf of the Cobb Area County Water District, and our question and suggestion is for PG&E, and we're just wondering what you guys are doing to reach out to municipal companies when you have your tree guys in the area to avoid damage to water mains, water services. Because since the vegetation cleanup has started, we've had multiple water main breaks and services going to people's homes from trees being dropped. And we find out when the customer calls us and says, I have no water. If there could be like a PG&E liaison. We also suggest 811. We use it, AT&T uses it, and local contractors use it. And we go out ahead of time and we'll mark the water mains. That's all I have.
So I'll say that's the first I've heard of that particular issue, but we've got someone that can talk to you and we can figure out how to get better on that locally, definitely.
Anyone else from the back chair section? If not, we're going to come up to this side, row 1, row 2, row 3.
Jessica Baiska with the Cobb Area Council. My question or comments really are on the vegetation management. We have had a lot of subcontractors and subcontractors in our area going on properties multiple times without permission, assessing, reassessing, reassessing trees. We've had a lot of problems. We've reached out to PG&E several times. We had an invitation to come to our council meeting last night, which we set up in December, and have been working on this for months, and it was a no-show. Apparently there was another meeting, but that was very disheartening to a community that has been trying to work with you on this. We understand the necessity of this program and we want it to be successful. This is an area that did not burn in the Valley Fire and is in the very high risk area. So we want this vegetation management to work, but we need transparency with you. We need you to come to the community, let everybody know what's happening, have the liaison that the water company can use to, and make sure that the implementation is done correctly. That's what we want.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Chandler. I believe you were at the last PSPS meeting, and I probably still told the story of the loss of financial and my business and the loss of life to my neighbor, so I won't get back into that with the time that I have. My point that I want to bring up is what Supervisor Sabatier brought up, is the trend that PG&E seems to have about saying the poles are fine when they're not. I've been reporting the poles in my neighborhood for 7 years since I've lived here. I have photos where I have my hand that deep into cracks in the poles. I have videos of woodpeckers on the poles right below the transformers. And the one-time PG&E workers have come out, they've said they're totally fine. But when a third-party inspector came out, they looked at these poles in my neighborhood and said, holy expletive, these poles are dangerous. I'm surrounded by acres and acres of vacant land with overgrown brush, and it scares the hell out of me. And I want to know what PG&E considers safe and how we can actually consider our neighborhood safe with these poles.
So I can't speak to your specific polls and what that standard would be. I will say that the average person looking at a poll is probably not the right person to determine whether a poll is safe or not. But if you think you've had that experience and you've had that independent experience, we should have you. We should come out and take a look at those polls.
I believe so, and I've sent photos in multiple times and get zero response from anyone at PG&E except for, we'll do something about it later.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can also share that information with us.
All right, row 4.
Hello, my name is Werner Pester. I'm from North Lakeport, and I moved here 3 years ago. And I have several issues. One of them would be I'm a CPAP user, And for that, I need a charging facility at least once a day. And my concern is if I would go to one of those resource centers, do I have to sit there for like 8 hours and wait until my battery is charged? Or can I drop it off and safely pick it up a couple of hours later? So I can sleep another night using that machine. The expense for such a battery is $200, so many people cannot afford that. So is there maybe a subsidy for people who have low income? So these would be two issues to think about. The other was during the extended power outage last year, I realized there's hardly any gas to come by. After the first day, there are probably all of maybe 2 stations or 3 stations in Lakeport, and then at day 3, 4, or 5, they're out of gas. So this would be another event which maybe would have to be coordinated with the city government or with the Lake County government to see how we can get gas, at least to get out of county if necessary. That would also be true for the people who run on private generators, because they would not have any refills left. The other interesting thing I realized, and that's a question for the engineer in your team, I drove to Lower Lake from Lakeport on Monday on 29, and there was a big event of power poles stacked up and crews of people working on a power line. And it seems to be, I'm an engineer, seems to be a high tension power line because the poles are very long. These are not the regular poles you put in a neighborhood. These were like extended lengths. And I'm still wondering, why would somebody put wooden poles in a high-risk area along Mount Conocti between Kelseyville and Lower Lake? So this baffles me, because this shouldn't be wooden poles, it should be concrete poles or metal poles. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone further from row 4? Not, we'll go to row 5. Row 6.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Gary Pace, Public Health Officer for the county, and I'm sorry I can't be here on Monday, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to say a few things. My interest is really protecting the health of the community, so preventing death, preventing morbidity in the medically fragile people, the electricity-dependent folks. A year ago, I was in some meetings with some of the PG&E folks, and we were talking about these potential PSPS events, and pretty much the message was, you're going to be on your own, kind of figure it out. And so, you know, this sort of happened. Then as we started getting into the events, it became a lot of kind of last minute kind of flailing, trying to get generators out here, trying to get things going. And I guess part of what I'm really interested in is, it seems like the communication has been such that we have a lot of skepticism about that you're going to follow through with stuff. I think Supervisor Sabatier's point is really important. You know, I was in the EOC, we were starting to try to plan on putting shelters up. We couldn't really get decent information on what you all were thinking. It seemed like you were much more liability prevention focused rather than you were helping us plan for the community at large. And so what, you know, now we're 4 months since the last serious one, 4 months probably or so before the next one, and we're still talking about planning and possibilities. And you know, in our department, we're pretty seriously working on different strategies kind of in parallel. I mean, a lot of the things you mentioned today are really good ideas. From our point of view, I think the most important thing is what's been brought up a couple different times, is 24-hour power accessibility for the medically fragile, electricity-dependent folks. But I think it's going to be more than just a CRC. It's going to need to have cots. They're going to need to be adequate power strips. because a lot of these folks are going to need to be able to come in and lay down and sleep during the night. So it's a little bit of a more than that, but I have a kind of a wish list. We've been sort of planning on sheltering possibilities for shelter sites around the county. It's a little bit frustrating that you just realize now that Dale's been out for over a month because, so you lost a month out of 8 months here. We're actively working on setting up shelter possibilities, so getting MOUs in place, all this kind of thing. So I'm happy to talk with somebody if you're having trouble figuring out exactly where the sites are. The other thing is the battery question. Some of these programs, this program, the incentive program for the solar, but I think you're hearing some of the folks in the community saying, we're not really able to access that thing. You mentioned this thing about batteries. We're working on batteries as well, but the California Foundation of Independent Living Center, so I'll pursue that. That's new information to me. We're very interested in, so one of our asks, so we had a couple different asks for you. One was to get transfer switches in 4 different sites around here so that we're not flailing in the middle of the power outage to try to get a generator to be able to access it. We want to be able to get enough cots for people to lay down and power strips, but if you're going to set those up, that'll be great. If there's enough, we can help partner with some of the staffing if some of that's needed or whatever, but we need to get some security that these things are actually going to be set up, because we are really seriously concerned about the possibility of loss of life. And and it's hard to trust you at this point because we're halfway to the next one and we don't see anything yet, right? So, but thank you for coming.
You ready? Brock Falkenberg, Lake County Superintendent of Schools. Schools are critical to the ongoing functioning of our community. And as I poll my colleagues around the state, I seem to hear a philosophy out there that if there's no power, we will not open schools. I have a different philosophy. I believe we need to open schools with or without power, whether it's a public safety power shutoff or any other reason that we don't have power. And I believe that we can mitigate the risks so that we can assure the community that the schools are safe, that their children are safe, and that quality educational opportunities and programming is continuing to happen. But Aaron, since I can look you in the eye, I'm going to use your first name if that's okay. I need your help to do that. I trust that you're here with our community interest at heart, and I also trust that you have the availability of resources that may provide that assistance and guidance that we need to make sure schools are open. I need support in consultation as to what some of these plans would mean if we're opening substation or we're powering substations, what schools will have power, how do we move forward with those, and how do we continue to identify resources to support technically, logistically, and maybe fiscally on-site generation opportunities for those schools that do not have power as a result of some of these plans. So I hope I can leave you a business card. Doesn't have to be you that reaches out to me, but I hope that you can provide some consultation to my staff and our school districts so we know how to move forward here. Thank you.
And I just want to say we will definitely do that. And in meetings that I've been in and my colleagues have been in, schools and the foundationalness of people's ability to go to work if their kids don't have a school to go to has come up again and again. So it's a conversation we've had at a number of different local levels, and we'd like to have it here too.
And that's absolutely what we have here as well. If schools don't open, our employees have a hard time going to work, our law enforcement officers have a hard time going to work. Thank you. Thank you, Brock. Thanks, Brock.
Hi, Kevin Ahajanian, candidate for District 5 Supervisor, and my question's for PG&E regarding the vegetation management. In the past couple of years, because I'm a homeowner on Cobb, I've been dealing with you guys directly as far as the removal of dead trees. On Cobb, we have one specific problem leading to another with ponderosa pines, starting with the bark beetles, moving on to the woodpeckers. And, you know, we've heard about that species and the damage they cause. I'm not going to get into that just yet. What seems to be happening with this is, I said this a while back to one of your employees, it had to do with the fact that this whole situation is going to be ongoing, but it's very, very slow moving. And what seems to be happening is there seems to be some sort of liability removed from PG&E from 4 to 5 steps away in subcontracting. And I'm wondering, I mean, from where the community's sitting at, it can't necessarily be that efficient. So, you know, we have problems of finding a point person and finding, you know, proper communication between subcontractors, getting from point A to point B, putting a sense of urgency on certain jobs. And, you know, we've even heard complaints about the cleanup. You know, the chipping takes about a week to 2 weeks, and it shouldn't. So my main question is, what can be done to increase the efficiency and the communication between the subcontractors?
So we do use entirely a contracted workforce for all of our vegetation management. That is standard practice in the industry. It's a challenging job to hire for and to train for. Again, we've gone in the last year from 3,000 people doing that work to 6,000. It is, by OSHA standards, the most dangerous job you can do in the United States. And yours is not the first complaint that I've heard or comment or constructive feedback, if you will, about some of the challenges of working with that. And we've had a mixed experience bringing on that many folks that quickly. We've let a number go, but clearly we still have more work to do. So I don't have you know, we're going to continue. We've had stand downs and training with those teams, and we continue with those practices. And the most valuable thing for us to figure out how to get better is to sit down and talk to you about the specific experiences you've had with specific crews, and then we work directly with them, and we just keep chipping away at the problem, no pun intended. So I would welcome having that conversation and figuring out how we can do that. I apologize for not having someone from our vegetation crew here. If I'd realized, or I should have known, it's always a challenging topic, and we should have had someone here to be able to speak to those directly. So I apologize for not having someone from that program here today.
Can I mention just real quick about this? I'll do this real quick. Wayne Engel, they cut my property. There's usually a forester that's assigned to these tree crews. And I got his card personally, got the forester. So find out from these tree crews who is the forester, because he's the one that's going to come and instruct these crews to do certain things. Because they're, these fellas that they're hiring are not, you know, they're just like I was, not trained and all that kind of stuff, just doing a job. So there are foresters. I contacted him, I had a problem, I called him up. He came out and everything was resolved. So find out who that forester is for those people who are doing the cutting. And I have and that will help you out.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're here with our last speaker for public input.
Well, let's hope so. Save the best for last. Hi, my name is Randy Murphy. I am the general manager and resident of Hidden Valley Lake. Wanted to point out a couple of things. We installed generators and we're a little bit self-sufficient through the PSPS season this last year. Our Green Bee restaurant is open to the public and was available to residents of the general area, not specifically to Hidden Valley Lake, so I want to make sure everybody understood that. I myself am available to assist this committee, obviously offering my services should the need arise. As the second largest population center in the county, I feel and my board feels we should be represented in this group, and so I'd like to offer that as well. One thing I haven't heard discussed, and I had a brief conversation with Supervisor Sabatier, pardon me for the pronunciation, before the meeting. the losses that were experienced, particularly related to food and things that were lost by individual residents and businesses, are not covered by insurance and were not reimbursed by PG&E. The insurance does not reimburse it because PSPS is a planned event. I call on our legislators that are represented here today to look at some form of compensation for those folks and do what is necessary in that respect. And I think that that's really all I had to say. But again, I commend everybody. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'd like to help.
Thank you. So we've taken in a lot of input. We've heard a lot of updates. I want to thank everybody for taking the time. The very last, do we have one last speaker? Okay.
My name is Juan Dominguez, Trailer Gleaners. I wasn't prepared for this, but since we're here. We have problems, and we serve 1,600 families with USDA commodities. In Lake County, we have 12 different sites. Our biggest site is Finley. We have a freezer that's 20 foot by 20 foot, and 2 coolers, 20 foot by 20 foot. And the last power shut-off that we had, we lost over 1,000 pounds of produce. We saved the meat because we put a lot of ice in there, and we kept the doors closed. But we have a problem. I started investigating how much it's going to cost us to get a generator there. And we're a nonprofit organization, of course, you guys know that. And it's going to cost us over $35,000. We can't afford it. So we're trying to reach PG&E a couple of times. I haven't been able to get anybody in contact, so therefore, I'm hoping I will do it today.
Where are you located? Excuse me, sir. Where are you located? Where are the two?
Finley, right down here. But we serve 12 different sites around the county. First week of the month, 12 different sites. The third week of the month, 4 different sites. Pretty soon it'll be 6. And for some of you who don't know this, we'll make it quick. The ability for people to get food from us has risen from $1,500 for one person to $2,400 for one person a month they can make and still come and get food. So we're going to get a big response to that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be qualified, especially the ones that are low income, minimum wage. They're all going to qualify. With 2 people, you're jumping over $3,500. So it's going to be a big push for us, and we need help. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. The last item on our agenda is next steps prior to our adjournment. I wanted to give PG&E and CPUC one final opportunity just to, as we leave here and as we move on to, our normal daily tasks, I want to give you the opportunity for things that we as a community should be looking for from you that shows that there is actual progress being made that will encourage us towards maybe being hopeful that this next PSPS season isn't going to be as destructive and as damaging as the last one was. So if you have anything that you really want the community to know and to be looking for that shows that we're moving forward, I'd appreciate knowing now.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and everyone who's stuck it out here. I just want to reiterate one small step that we committed to on the self-generation incentive program and doing a more deep dive on that and where we could fill in the gaps, particularly where the substation generation options will not be available. And I want to commit to obviously working with your working group on specifics that you want to see and deliverables from PG&E. There's quite a few that I heard today, and we'll go back and digest those and obviously continue our communication so that we get those in place. We are on a quick timeline, as was mentioned, on updating those requirements to PG&E, so I would like to work with you in the upcoming weeks here to finalize what you need. We will have to wait post PG&E's decisions around where they'll make their generation investments in the substations to figure out how we all plan around that. So thank you again, and we will certainly be back in touch and working on those areas.
Thank you. Aaron.
So I would say, what we have been looking for as a plan is to really show up locally and begin having that conversation around all of those plans, not at the 30,000 feet that we're maybe talking about them at a high level today, but where we're, rolling out big maps or looking at, GIS stuff on screens and really helping understand where all of those things are happening. We're looking to come back in March and begin having those conversations with your staff and the staff that support the cities and counties in the area and anyone else who you think is important to be involved in that process. So I guess I would say judge us by the actions that we take. I hear the feedback loud and clear. There's been a lot of the right language, but not enough of the right actions. And I think we deserve to be judged on our actions, and that's a very fair standard. So look for those actions and that increased transparency over what you've seen in the recent past about what we are and are not doing with our infrastructure and how we're approaching that and why. So those would be the things that I would encourage you all to look for from us as we're working with you over the coming months.
Thank you. Come on up.
Since the SJIP has come up a few times today, I have some information sheets for anyone who's interested in learning more about the program. I did misunderstand the structure of the meeting, and I thought it was going to be a lot fewer people, but I have some, and they're all clearly marked draft because, as I mentioned earlier, the new rules are pretty complex, and we're still working on finalizing them, and they're all, contained within the official program handbook, which is being reviewed and will be approved for the residential sector next week, and then non-residential by April 1st. But this will give you an idea of how the CPUC, which populations the CPUC is targeting for the funding. Actually, the most important information is the website, which has the handbook. If you go on there now, the current version is from early 2019, which doesn't even mention the resiliency budget, but that's all forthcoming in the next few weeks. So anyone who's interested in learning more about the program or wants information, let me know.
Thank you. If the committee has nothing further,
do we get time to reflect a little bit on some things?
reflect?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of more comments.
So right before we adjourn, we'll have just a little more time for closing comments for the committee. That would be you, right now.
I didn't know it was right up. I have several things. And sorry, a gentleman talked here about a pole that he thought was not very strong or something. Anyway, the same thing happened near my house, at the corner of my house. I had it inspected. Inspector came out fairly quickly and said, yeah, it needs to be replaced. So I asked him, how long is it going to take? He didn't know. It turns out about a year and a half later, it finally was replaced. One comment. The second comment is your CEO. If he appears in San Francisco with a safety vest on, that's a little bit disingenuous. Please don't do that. It's an insult to us. Because most of the people here have been or have lost their homes, driven through fire to be evacuated. It has a psychological impact, particularly if you reflect that if you call for another PSPS, people get a little nervous here. So I want you to make sure that if you call for one again, that you think about that you have people that have lost their homes, driven through fires to escape or being evacuated for numerous times over the last 5 years. So think about that. So it better be real.
Can I just let you know that
sure.
Our CEO was wearing a vest during the PSPS because to be in our emergency operations center, you must wear a vest. And I think
I had to wear one when I was there.
Supervisor can speak to that.
Well, to me, it looked a little bit disingenuous. Sorry.
But I hear the feedback nonetheless. I hear that that point, but that's why he's in it. And our CEO was in our EOC an extensive amount of time during the event. I want to let you know that he did.
Okay.
He
All right,
did
thank you.
participate. That doesn't make the events any easier locally, but there was engagement all the way to the top.
Okay. One comment or thing so that you might be able to get. There's been a lot of talk about communication and stuff. If you can arrange or have arranged with, all your cell phone companies that have cell towers here to have power backup for 7 days instead of 2, that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
I make a comment on next steps. So I want to make a comment on next steps. I think that it's pretty obvious to everybody in the room before this meeting and after this meeting that there will be a future PSPS. We hope that PSPS will be a little bit easier to digest. But I think that this committee should continue on to help make sure that we are moving forward and making sure that every year that passes that we are bridging this gap between normalcy and the situation that we're dealing with, because this is not normalcy. And so I would suggest that we continue. I would also suggest, and I know it's been brought up in our previous meeting, that right now Lake County does not have a PG&E spokesperson or a public affairs person. That is going to be really important to make sure that that person can be linked to this committee and make sure to provide information and updates and necessary comments on the questions that we may have. So I think those are the two things I would like to leave with, is that we do not stop meeting together and keep pushing to make, because the PSPS, they pass our imaginary lines that we've created for jurisdictions. So I think that all of us being on a committee together is important for a combined voice to continue forward.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to give you an update on that because I know you had put that on the list of questions. Allison Talbot is filling in, but she's covering a lot of territory, and I've heard positive feedback, but it's not fair to her or to you to have somebody having that much territory to cover. We are in the process of hiring. We did not get an applicant in December that we thought met the standards of what needed to be. It is challenging to hire at PG&E right now, as you might imagine. We have 10 more candidates that we're currently vetting right now, and we know we need to give you somebody who's local. I would put in a small pitch that if you have suggestions or names or recommendations or people's arms you can twist who would like to help us show up better locally and be more aware of local issues, we would welcome that.
We're going to go across, right?
Did you have something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we'll go to Vogue and then we'll go to Russ.
I do want to follow up on, Allison Talbot is here in the audience. And I agree, it's not fair. She does a great job answering the phone for PG&E, but getting that individual rep here for Lake County is very important. The other thing, obviously, I took advantage of going to the CPUC meeting, and also when I came down to the second meeting for the telecommunications, I took the opportunity to go to the EOC while we were having an event here in Lake County. I think that's very important. That is a key, I think, to communication. Always having those doors open for any one of our governments to have someone in your EOC while this is going on. When you talk about immediate communication, you're in the room when those decisions are happening. So I definitely want to make sure that we work that out where we have that rep. So even if we don't have someone hired by next season, that opportunity is always there. And I know it is, but I want to really just reiterate on that. The other thing on moving forward, I think the next steps, this committee needs to stay in place for the long-term solutions. Undergrounding is the way to go, but we understand that's going to cost, and that's going to be a long-term thing. But we definitely need to keep communicating on this and make sure that we're taking all advantage of for our folks here to understand that this is a new reality right now, and we also need to be always looking at microgridding or other opportunities with backup batteries for our own homes if we have that opportunity. Because, being on the Risk Reduction Authority, which is part of a new JPA formed by all the fire departments here in the county, this is a long-term problem that we're going to be having throughout many different years and different agencies that are going to have to step up and help us. And I would like to offer that when we do get a PG&E rep, that they attend the Risk Reduction Authority meetings here in Lake County, so we can always be updating on the risk as they're being abated and other risks that we may notice as they move through. I think most of the things have been touched on, but the other thing I want to do is thank Commissioner Guzman from the CPUC and everybody who's come here to Lake County to talk about these issues. I want to thank you for hearing me and giving me my time down in San Francisco when I carried the letter of this board, which really laid out what happened to us here in Lake County, all of our constituents, all of our business owners, and what we were going through. So I want to thank you for taking that to heart and showing up here today. I really appreciate that, everybody from the CPUC. PG&E standpoint, Aaron, I know you're in the hot seat right now, but you've taken one step forward because the last guy was a volunteer who said he volunteered to come here and he didn't answer any questions. I know it's just words right now, but we're going to move forward in a positive manner. I want to thank you for coming here, but you're going to be coming back a whole bunch more. You'll be here Monday, and we'll continue to follow this stuff up. And we just keep working in this manner, and we're going to make it better for everybody. And I just want to thank you for showing up today. Thank you very much. And thank you, Commissioner Guzman. Really appreciate it.
Councilmember Curry.
Yes. Again, I'll also thank all of you for coming, and we've got a lot of great insights from speaking to you at lunch before and during this. Mr. Johnson, you've answered a lot of questions. One of the things that I would want to focus on here are those 4, possibly 5 substations in the county, and the emphasis on putting generating units on those. As I understand it, the 4 serve a total of 21,500 services, which I'm going to interpret to being probably twice that many people. That's the biggest part of this county. So it's absolutely essential to me that you get generating units in those substations, and that'll be one huge impact in reducing the impact of the PSPS events, or fires for that matter, because you'll have that microgrid or resiliency on smaller areas. So very much would encourage you and your company to get that done. Commissioner Guzman, for your outfit to oversee and make sure it does get done. So again, I thank you for all of you for coming, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Councilmember Martina, do you have any closing comments?
Well, I would just say that I'm not okay with this being a new reality for us. It is outrageous what we've been through. Focusing on the grids to have less impact to our city centers is going to be really important to us. Continuing to communicate with you guys. We're really your partner in this, and we weren't treated that way. So we look forward to that changing and making it a lot less painful.
Anything from city management, county admin? So just closing then, I just want to send a message out to our communities. We are not having all that much rain yet, but still the grass and the weeds are growing. And we're getting to a point now where the county and the city staff are going to be looking at our properties to make sure we're taking care of those weeds and knocking them down. So everybody be aware of that. We're getting now into the time where we need to prepare so that our own private properties are not going to be contributing to the hazards. I know the city of Lakeport is probably going to be doing drive-bys in March, and we'll be sending out weed abatement notices in April. So that's the one message I want to hand to the community, is while these agencies and our jurisdictions are moving to try to take care of the big problems, let's take care of what we got going on at home. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here today, and for everyone who's, especially to the staff, Carol and Carolyn, who actually made this meeting possible with all the scheduling. Thank you, everybody in the public who took the time to actually join us, and thank you so much for your input. Keep it coming. We need to all be working together to find these solutions. And our meeting's going to adjourn now. Thanks.